Well, good morning, everybody. So glad that you have chosen to be here today. I want to welcome everyone who is joining us in Harrison County. I want to welcome all of you who are hanging out in our overflow space, everyone who's watching online, and everyone who is in the room, but you're watching me on the side screens right now, even though you're in the room with me. Really glad that you are here, because today we are going to jump back in to our study in the book of Daniel, and we're going to finish Daniel chapter 1 today. Last week, we started this new series called Dare to be Different. And as we started this new series, I told you that God did not create you to fit in. He created you to stand out. And yet the sad reality is that there are a lot of people who spend most of their lives doing everything they possibly can just to fit in. They default into following the crowd rather than remaining determined to follow after the person, the example of Jesus Christ. And I would just tell you that if that's the way you choose to do life, you will end up living a very normal life. Tim Tebow once said, "You and I were created by God to be so much more than normal." Following the crowd is not a winning approach to life. In the end, it's a loser's game, because we never become who God created us to be by trying to be like everybody else. And yet the truth is, we've all made that mistake at some point in our lives. We've all found ourselves in a situation where we felt a little different, but we tried to blend in with the crowd around us. But have you ever considered why? Why do we try to be like everybody else rather than trying to be the best version of who God has created us to be? Why in the world would we want to blend in with everybody else when we could stand out? I want you to think about it like this. Out of all the creatures on the earth, the chameleon is the master at blending in. In fact, I want you to look at some of these pictures. You'll see in this first picture that the chameleon has the ability to adapt or to change so that it can look like the bark on a tree. It's incredible. It just has the ability to change colors and naturally blend into its surroundings. In this next picture, you'll see that the chameleon has the ability to blend in with a rock, so much so it's really hard to see it. A chameleon can even blend in with the leaves that are blowing on a tree. Check out this next picture. Right? Can you see it? I mean, it's amazing. The chameleon can even change and look so much so it's hard to detect. Look at this next picture. This one is the one that really blew my mind. Do you see it in there? Can you see it? Look really hard up in the top. No, there's not a chameleon in that picture. I just wanted to mess with you, but you fell for it, right? Now, the scientists will tell you that the chameleon will blend into its surroundings for a couple of different reasons. One of the reasons they change their colors is because when they change their color, they can either use color of their body to warm their body temperature up or to even cool their body temperature down. But scientists will tell you that the primary reason that a chameleon changes to blend in with its surroundings is because it keeps them safe. They blend in so well that predators don't even notice them. Now, I want you to think about that, and I want you to be really, really honest with yourself. Why do you settle for blending in rather than standing out? Why are there moments in your life when you choose to follow the crowd, even when the crowd is going in a direction that you do not want to go? I'll tell you right now, the reason a lot of people blend in is because it feels safer than standing out. There's something inside of you that knows that this world is full of predators. And because there's something inside of you that just wants to be safe, you blend in, you fly under the radar, you act like everyone else because you do not want to attract any negative and unnecessary attention. Now, the sad thing is that you were not always that way. In fact, when you were a really little kid, you didn't mind being different. You didn't mind standing out or saying things that might cause people to look at you a little bit different. You would probably quick to raise your hand, quick to ask questions. You may dress in funny clothes or as a kid wear costumes out in public, right? You didn't mind standing out. But somewhere between grade school and grad school, some kids saw you being different. They opened up their mouth. They embarrassed you in public. And that experience scarred you, and it told you it's better for you to spend the rest of your life blending in rather than standing out, right? And so that's what we do. A lot of us have just determined to spend the rest of our lives blending in because we're afraid that if we stand out, people may think things about us. People may say things about us. If we're too different or perceived as a little weird, people may judge us. They may criticize us. They make fun of us. And I would just tell you, the truth is, it probably is safer for you to blend in. But I want to remind you that if you spend your life blending in with everybody, then your life will impact nobody. And so the question is, what do you want to do with your life? Do you just want to blend in and fit in and somehow survive and not attract any unnecessary attention or criticism? Or do you want to live a life that is different so that your life might make a real difference? Craig Rochelle once wrote, "I would rather be remembered for standing out than forgotten for blending in." In so many ways, this is the story of this young man named Daniel and his friends as it's recorded in this Old Testament book. Daniel and his buddies, they grew up in the city of Jerusalem, but around the age of 15, they were forced to move away into Babylon. Now, you need to know that Jerusalem and Babylon, they could not be more different. Jerusalem was a godly place that was primarily influenced by God himself. They followed the ways of God and the will of God. They prayed to God. They worshiped God, but not Babylon. Babylon was an evil place that was ruled by an evil king whose name was Nebuchadnezzar. And so when Daniel and his three friends roll into Babylon, they have a decision that they have to make. Do we play it safe, follow the crowd, blend in and be like everybody else, or do we dare to be different? Do we conform to who they want us to be, or do we live our lives striving to be who God wants us to be? In fact, this is the question that a lot of people still wrestle with to this very day. For some of us, this is the issue that keeps us from fully surrendering our lives to Jesus Christ. We do not want to be perceived as too different or maybe even a little bit weird. Now, again, I want to admit to you that in our world today, it is safer to blend in than to stand out. But I want you to think about their world. Because these guys weren't living in a world where people just made fun of them. These guys were living in an evil world ruled by an evil king who would actually kill them if he didn't like them. But these guys, young guys, they determined in their minds and in their hearts that they were going to follow God's plan for their life because they knew that following God's plan would not just make them different. They believed that following God's plan for their life would actually make them better. And because they were better, this evil king named Nebuchadnezzar, he started to respect these four young boys in ways that he had never respected anyone in his kingdom before. Watch this. Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now, God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. Now, if you were with us last week, then you know that we ended with verse 8 last week. We're starting with verse 8 again this week because this is the most important verse in the entire book of Daniel. This verse really does set the stage for everything that we're going to read in the rest of the book. Shortly after arriving in Babylon, Daniel has already made up his mind. I will not be corrupted by my culture. He's already made up his mind. I will not be corrupted by this king. He's made up his mind that he is going to live his life for God. He's not going to live his life for Nebuchadnezzar. And that single decision then affects every other decision that he makes throughout the entire book. And so in chapter 1, that single decision means that Daniel is not going to eat the royal food and wine from the king's table because he knows that that food has been offered to false gods in pagan worship. And so he will have nothing to do with it. That single decision that he has made, he's already determined in his mind. It affects the decisions that he makes in chapter 3 when he and his friends are being pressured to bow down and worship this giant statue that Nebuchadnezzar has created. If you look in chapter 6, you're going to see that this single decision that he made in chapter 1, it affects the way he prays when Nebuchadnezzar passes a new law in chapter 6 and says, you are forbidden to pray. And so as early as chapter 1, verse 8, I want you to know Daniel has already made up his mind. He's not even going to think about it. He's not going to make his decision in a moment where he is being pressured to make the wrong decision. He's made his decision before he ever felt the pressure to conform at all. Daniel is going to be faithful to God, and he is going to let the chips fall wherever they may because he believes that his life and his future is in God's hands. It is not in Nebuchadnezzar's hands. And that is the thing that gives him the courage to be different from the rest of the world around him. In just these 2 verses, you learn a very powerful lesson from Daniel. Here it is. When you are faithful to God, God's favor will be all over you. When you're faithful to God, God's favor will be all over you. And so here's my question for you. Would you rather blend in and be on your own or honor God and have his favor all over your life? Daniel determined in his mind, I am not going to blend in. I am going to stand out and live for God. He makes up his mind in verse 8, and then we see that God goes to work on his behalf immediately in verse 9. God caused the official to show favor and compassion to this kid called Daniel. God has the power to change how people in authority think about you. We need to understand this. God has the power to change how people in authority feel about you. God has the power to change how people in authority actually treat you. And so with that in mind, you make your mind up that you are going to live for God and that you are going to trust God with your life and your future. Now, let me ask you this, okay? Do you really think that at this point in his life, Daniel was able to see the favor of God in his life? Do you think Daniel was really able to feel the favor of God in his life? Think about his circumstances for just a minute. All Daniel knew at this point in his life is that he had been taken 700 miles away from his family, friends, and places of worship. All Daniel knew is that he'd been taken from his home and he was being forced to live in a terrible place called Babylon. All Daniel knew is that he was being treated like a slave and that he was being brainwashed and pressured to conform to this very ungodly culture. And because of that, I'm telling you, I don't think that Daniel could really see God's favor on his life, and I don't think he could feel God's favor all over his life. And if you don't understand that, then it will be hard for you to stay faithful to God as you face the pressure of society to conform. It would have been really easy for Daniel in this moment to look at his situation and go, why in the world would I be faithful to God when it doesn't feel like God is being faithful to me? I mean, I've been taken 700 miles from my home. I've been forced to live like a slave. I'm being brainwashed and corrupt. Why would I live for God when it doesn't feel like God is here for me? But Daniel did not do that. Daniel stayed faithful to God even when he couldn't see how God was working or when it didn't feel like God was working. And I just want you to know that the same is true in our lives. You may not always be able to see God's favor. You may not always feel like you have God's favor, but you can always count on God's favor. That when you are faithful to God, I promise you, God is going to be faithful to you. This isn't just a lesson that we learn in the book of Daniel. This is a promise that we are given in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. Listen very carefully to what the wise man wrote. He said, "Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of both God and man." That is what is happening in Daniel's life. This dude was full of love for God. Daniel was committed to being faithful to God even when it got hard. And because of that, he had God's favor all over his life. He has a good name and a good reputation, not just in the sight of God, but in the sight of this man who was entrusted to make decisions about his life. Now, the story continues. Check out verses 10 to 16. All that background, but the official told Daniel, "I am afraid." Remember, it's not safe to stand out. He says, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this, and he tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink, and he gave them vegetables instead. Now, Daniel and his friends, they are determined to be different. But like we said earlier, sometimes being different can be a little bit dangerous. In this particular case, with this particular king, it's not safe, it's risky. And the guard knows it. And so this guard finds himself in a little bit of a dilemma. He likes Daniel. Something inside of him feels favored toward Daniel. Something inside of him makes him feel compassion for Daniel. But this guard also likes his head being attached to his body, okay? And so he's concerned about how this king is going to react. And so he expresses this concern. And so he says to Daniel, "Daniel, we got an issue. If I do what you're asking me to do and I change your diet, and then you and your buddies start looking worse than the other young men your age, that king, he will have my head because of you. He understands, and Daniel understands that different doesn't always mean better. And so in a very respectful way, Daniel listens to him and he says, well, then let's do this. Let's just run a test for 10 days. Give us nothing to eat except for vegetables. Give us nothing to drink except for water. And then at the end of the 10 days, I want you to compare our appearance to their appearance. Compare the way we look to the way the crowd looks. Compare our physical appearance to the appearance of all these other young people who are also eating the royal food and drinking the royal wine. And at the end of 10 days, only 10 days, there was a noticeable difference in the way they looked. Daniel and his friends did not just look different. They looked better. Now, you can make this into a vegan argument if you want to, okay? For me in my house, I'm going to keep eating meat, okay? But you do you, all right? But there is a point here that I want to make that extends way beyond your diet. In fact, it reaches into every single area of your life. It's a truth that I try to tell you all the time, and it's simply this. Following Jesus makes life better. And following Jesus makes you better at life. Daniel and his young friends, they have made up their mind. We are going to do life God's way. We are not going to do it Nebuchadnezzar's way, because he believes that following God will make life better, but he also believes that following God's ways will make him better at life. And if you really believe that, then it will give you the confidence that you need to resist the pressure to conform to the world around you. If you're faced with a decision, and you start thinking about this decision, you start thinking to yourself, follow the ways of the world or the ways of God, and you really believe that the ways of God will not only make your life better, it will make you better at life, then it becomes a whole lot easier to take the better way rather than taking the way that you know is worse. Daniel and his friends really believed that if we do it God's way, rather than going with the crowd and doing it their way, then we will be better. And the truth is, they were better. And they weren't just physically better. Look at verses 17 to 21. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel, he could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. Watch this. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Listen to me. These guys were on a whole other level in every possible way. Physically, they were different. Intellectually, there was no denying it. These guys are different. If you look in verse 17, it says that God gave them knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. Spiritually, we know that they were different. These guys were so in tune with God that Daniel had the ability to interpret dreams and visions that no one else could interpret, which is going to come in very handy in just a couple of chapters in this book. When this king sits down at the end of this training program, and he starts to interview them, the text says that he found none who were equal to these 4 men. In every matter about which this king questioned them, he found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters who were already working for the king. If you're using your Daniel Bible journal, I want you to circle those 3 words, 10 times better. These guys are not just different. These guys were better than everyone else in the kingdom. And remember this, they're only 18 years old. The other magicians and all the other enchanters in the kingdom, they've got a lot more experience. They got a lot more education. They got a lot more time under their belt. And yet somehow, some way, following God's way, following God's plan makes them 10 times better than everybody else in the entire kingdom. If you are a young person between the ages of 15 and 25, I want you to hear that. You do not fall back. You do not spend your life trying to fit in. You stand out and you believe that you may be young, but you are never too young to make a difference. I want you to listen to what the New Testament also says about this very issue. The Apostle Paul is writing to a young man whose name was Timothy, and he said something very similar. He said, "Do not let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity." Students, you can make a difference today, not just someday. But in order to make a difference in this world, Jesus has to make a difference in your life. Daniel and his friends, they were different physically because they followed God's will and God's ways. They were different intellectually because they followed God's plan for their life. They were different spiritually. Paul had the exact same expectation for young people in the New Testament. He said, guys, as young people, you don't need to fall back. You need to stand out. You need to set an example in speech. You need to set an example in your conduct. You need to set an example in the kind of faith that you have in God to do big things in and through your life. You need to set an example in the way you love people, and you need to set an example in the purity that you practice in your life. You do not live like everybody else. You live your life like Jesus. And when you live your life like Jesus, you will make a difference in this world, whether you are young or old. Now, let me tell you why this is so important, especially in our world today. I really hate to admit this, but it's true, and so I have to say it. In our world today, people are not all that interested in Christianity because people are not all that impressed with Christians. There was a day and a time in this country when people looked at Christians as though they were the solution to the problem. In our world today, people look at Christians as though they are the problem. That they are not impressed with Christians, and so they have no interest in Christianity. People look at Christians today and they see so much hypocrisy in their life, they don't respect their character because their character doesn't match up to what they claim to believe. People look at Christians today and they don't respect their work ethic. People look at Christians today and don't always respect their physical appearance. People look at Christians today, they don't respect their money management. People look at Christians today and they listen to what they believe, but they can't articulate what they believe, why they believe it. They can't defend their beliefs, and so they have little respect for our worldview. People look at Christians, and because they don't respect Christians, they don't want to be Christian. And yet, you look at the story of Daniel, and because they respected him, that they wanted to know more about him and what he believed. This is why I am so thankful for a young man in our world right now whose name is C.J. Stroud. If you don't know that name, C.J. Stroud, he is a rookie quarterback for the Houston Texans. He got recruited to be the quarterback for that team because they were a very sorry team. And over the course of this year, he's taken a terrible team at least into the second round of the playoffs. In the regular season, he threw for over 4,000 yards. He threw for 23 touchdowns and only 5 interceptions. Over the course of the 3 previous seasons, the Houston Texans had won 11 total games. Last night, In this season alone, they won 11 total games, and they continue deeper and deeper into the playoffs. C.J. Stroud is different, and he uses his platform to make a difference. Last week, after the game was over, he walked into his post-game press conference wearing this shirt, and then he said this. He said, "This is bigger than just ball. And if I have to use football for my purpose to spread the gospel in the life of Jesus Christ, then I'll do that." And I think that's what God wants. Because they respect what he's done on the football field, they respect who he is as a man of faith and a follower of Jesus. Now, if he were a terrible quarterback, if he had just led them to a 3-win season, not an 11-win season, if he was on the brink of losing his job, they would have no respect for him, and they would have no respect for his faith. Daniel and his friends were so much better than everyone else in the kingdom that they commanded the respect of people in their culture. Physically, they looked better. Intellectually, they were better. You're going to see that when they start their job, they perform better. People looked at them with respect, and they wanted to know what makes those guys so much different and what makes those guys so much better. The answer? God is what made them different. And Daniel knew it. Daniel didn't have an ego. Daniel wasn't prideful, taking credit for what God had done. Throughout this entire chapter, he points over and over and over again to God because he knows that God is the one who's making a real difference in his life. If you look in verse 9, he said, God is the one who gave us favor with that guard. If you look in verse 17, he knows that God is the one who gave him knowledge and understanding. If you look at the end of verse 17, he knows that God is the one who gave them the ability to understand visions and interpret people's dreams. Daniel is writing this down, trying to make it really, really clear. This isn't about me being better. This is about the fact that when I obey God, God makes me better. God has made these young men different so that they might make a real difference. And I'm telling you right now, he wants to do the exact same thing in and through your life. But in order for that to happen, you have to believe that following Jesus is not just going to make your life better. You have to believe that following Jesus is really going to make you better at life and put you in a position where you can make a greater difference in this world. The Apostle Paul was writing about this very issue to a group of Christians who were living in the first century in the city of Corinth. And this is what he said to them in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 31. He said, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God." Now, does that sound like Daniel to you? Daniel? When they're trying to pass down the royal food and wine, you need to remember this. Whether you eat or drink, you don't eat or drink for them. You eat and you drink for the glory of God. When you go to work, Daniel, and you start interpreting visions and dreams, you interpret visions and dreams for the glory of God. When you are a student in that 3-year training program, Daniel, you study the literature and the language for the glory of God. And when you do, there will be a noticeable difference in your life. I'm telling you right now, as a follower of Jesus, Jesus should make you different in every area of your life. Jesus should make a difference in the way you do your work. Students, Jesus should make a difference in the way you do school. Jesus should obviously make a difference in you spiritually or morally. But I want to challenge you. Jesus should also make you different physically. Jesus should make you different financially. Jesus should make you different relationally and even vocationally. And when it does, when your relationship with Jesus starts to make a difference in your entire life, the world around you will want to know what makes you different. They'll want to know What makes you better? And in that moment, you have an opportunity to let them know that following Jesus has made my life better, and following Jesus can make your life better too. And so let me just ask you one more time. You going to live your whole life following the crowd? Or are you going to live the rest of your life following after the person of Jesus Christ? Would you rather blend in and be on your own? Or would you rather stand for God and have His favor all over your life? Will you pray with me? As we bow our heads in prayer, I want to do something just a little different today. I want to ask you to stand in our time of prayer today. You can go ahead and get on your feet. As we enter into this time of prayer, I want to ask you first and foremost, have you ever made a decision to follow Jesus? For some of you, you've probably thought about it, but you didn't want to be perceived as too different. You didn't want people in the world around you to think that you were weird because you were now a Christian. Man, if that's you, I hope and pray to God that you have understood that God doesn't just want to make you different. He's calling you to follow Him because it will make you better. And so if that's you, I want to invite you right now to push past that fear and that faulty way of thinking, and right where you stand, I want you to pray and say, God, I am sorry that I have cared more about what others think than what you think. Today, I'm making a decision. I'm asking Jesus to forgive my sins. I'm asking Jesus to lead my life. I know that He will make me different, but I believe that He will also make me better. As you think about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, I want to ask you another question. In what way is God calling you to be different? Just ask Him. Say, God, how do you want to change me? God, how are you calling me to grow? Where do I need to get better? Where do I need to stop following the crowd? And where do I need to be more committed to following Christ? God, together as a group of people, we are giving you our lives. We are giving you our hearts, and we ask that you would take us, that you would change us, and that through us you would change the entire Mississippi Gulf Coast. We pray it all in the name of Jesus. Amen.